Welcome back to another episode of AI FISEC Today, the physical security industry's first and only podcast dedicated to uncovering the mysteries and opportunities around AI in the physical security industry. I'm your host, Don Moreau, and today's episode will explore AI in retail and restaurants. And I'm pleased to introduce you to Brock Weeks. Brock is the CEO and co-founder of the cloud video platform company Savvy. Before Savvy, he was an SVP of sales of Orca Health and held several strategies and sales positions at Vivint Inc. He is consultant on sales and leadership for several Fortune 500 companies, and he holds a BS in professional sales with a minor in finance from Weber State University. He has served on numerous local boards and organizations, and most important to him is his role as a husband to his wife, Kelsey, and father to his 3 children. Now, let's dive into the conversation with Brock to learn about AI in retail and restaurants. Right. Brock, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, great to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on this episode to talk about, I'm sure, something that's running the minds of any of the restaurant and retail experts out there in the security industry and how AI impacts that space. And that's what we're going to talk about, right? Is this whole, what's AI doing maybe for security between these verticals? And I even know from personal experience, selling to these verticals, they have a lot of similarities and also a lot of differences. And so really excited to have this conversation. But before we do that, while we got an intro coming in about you, I'd love to hear about your background from your own words to the audience, and and how I guess, and how you fit into this whole AI to restaurant and retail realm.
Yeah, no, I've been able to spend the last 16 years of my career, really the bulk of my career, when technology's transforming from point solutions to platforms that enable new types of operations and workflows. I was fortunate to be a part of a security company that transitioned into a home automation platform, worked on both the sales side of things, building teams and training teams, as well as on the strategy side. And as we saw security move from things like arming and disarming an alarm, right, to controlling door locks, making it easier for your kids to get inside the home, controlling temperature, all of those things, and that transformation that happened in the early 2010s. Through that, I was fortunate to kind of be on the front lines of that change from a technology perspective and realizing this has far more application in the commercial world than it does in the residential world to, at the core, make people's lives easier in really simple, mundane things that before was really difficult to connect and work together.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it certainly makes sense why you're the guy to talk about this today. So I think one thing I would really love to start with, Brock, is demystifying the hype versus reality talk, right? And I know security practitioners really, really like to do that. And especially for someone like myself who's been following AI for a while, it's a real conversation, right? Because I mean, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. So on that, so how can retail and restaurant operators distinguish between genuinely effective AI solutions and those built on marketing hype?
Yeah, you talk about how real the problem is. It's almost made in the beginning computer vision, right? Analytics, which were the precursor to like true AI. It's almost made it a little bit of a joke and a buzzword. And the people are like, I've heard all the horror stories about it. I don't know if I want to go there. But if you look at it at its core, whenever there's anything new, groundbreaking in technology, we always tend to go to like the fringe, most novel things that could be done, rather than the actual like high impact repeatable tasks that we're doing all day, every day. And so when we approached this problem and looked at AI, we're like, all right, we're building this really large data set. How can we leverage AI? It came down to what are those things that actually have scalability and they're not a custom development each and every time. If you're able to scale it across entire organizations to knock out repetitive tasks, so you can free up your team's brain power to do what they do best, which is take action on information and implement it. We want to get information in their hands reliably and quickly and give full context. So I think when you start to look and say, okay, is this actually scalable? Like, could this work across my entire organization? What's the actual impact and ROI to the organization? How often is this problem happening? How many people in my organization is it affecting? And you start to look at that and go, oh, there's actually some really high impactful things that AI can do around basic people tracking and vehicle tracking in our industry, right? drive-through speed of service. We've all had that experience as a consumer in the drive-through
Mhm.
when they ask, "Hey, sir, could you just go ahead and pull forward real quick?" When you're at the pickup window and you're like, "Why in the world are they doing this to me?" And it creates a negative customer experience. You have to sit there and wait forever, and it's because the only way they were able to track speed of service before was a loop system that looked at one isolated window. So they tracked and measured it, and employees said, "Great, this is what I measured on." So they reached the threshold of when I'm not doing good, move the customer forward, right? Like, terrible experience. But if you're actually just able to use a camera and track that whole experience, that's something that's impacting every site, every customer, every employee, right? Like high impact things.
And do you find that that opportunity to elevate that experience has been more meaningful than just the security thing?
Yes. Um, I think security is right. That's what I've spent the bulk of my career in, and we're on a podcast about that, right? The physical
Yep.
security. And now we need to keep in mind specifically in the industries that we serve, which is retail, restaurants, convenience stores, those distributed enterprises. These high risk security things, those types of events, what is the depth and magnitude of how often they're happening versus some of these operational impacts? So, though really important and high magnitude when they do happen, the amount of time in which they're happening and if they're similar each and every time, that's actually really difficult and not very tangible right now. Whereas some of these operational metrics and brand compliance metrics and task management are very standardized and really honestly perfectly built for something like AI agents to create a workflow around and tackle for you.
I love it. Yeah, and I'd love to come back to agents and actions later, and maybe say that for the end, but or somewhere in between, we'll find out. But the thing about you just said, I've said a few times for some of the audience, but we've also grown our audience since I last said this. That I 100% am on board with what you're saying, because to sell risk is really, really hard to do. Because what I had found as a seller in this industry is that for risk to get sold, that it has to be high in probability and high in impact. And it's actually typically physical security can be low in probability, but high in impact. So yeah, it is a problem when it happens, but it's not so frequent. But what is frequent is POS transactions. They happen every day, many times a day. And so to have PCI DSS compliance obviously is something in retail that's super important. That's a given, and how do we marry those transactions against this to see whatever we want and to interpret what we need, which you might have something on that. So I think that's that. When I was asking that question, a lot of that was coming from even my own personal experience of knowing that, to push a lot of the security technology, it's like, oh, by the way, operational efficiencies first and then security stuff second. I think a lot of times it actually feels better to say security stuff first, and by the way, it's also operational efficiency. I think I'm not trying to say, I am saying, but I don't want to say necessarily that one's more important than the other, because physical security has a high impact. But at the same time, these are businesses and they have to make a business decision. So depending on their risk adversity, they're gonna live in a camp that's going to serve them. And I think one could argue pretty easily that when it's high probability and high impact, they will be in a better position. So like theft or shrink, or the metrics within these industries that are pretty popular. I don't know what the one in restaurants would be. Maybe it's like the adulterated food or missed deliveries. So
Yeah, no, on the point you're hitting on about, right, the magnitude of it versus the frequency. We are looking at new verticals, right, that our technology can expand into, and we were interviewing head of operations, senior VP of operations at a very large organization operating hundreds of locations. And this example just repeats itself over and over, where we start talking about what we could do with cameras and what we could do with tracking that to improve operational efficiency and the customer experience and really improve the work life of the people within their organization. Because I'm a huge proponent that AI is not going to replace people, it's going to amplify and improve quality of life. But the conversation always goes something like, and could we track, because if we have a break-in or some sort of a hold-up situation, could we track that person out in the parking lot and understand before they even come in to the store that they're potentially doing something nefarious. And you start to go, okay, well, let's break down how AI would have to predict that and track that person. And are they always wearing the same clothes? Because we live here in Utah. There's a lot of people with beanies on coming from ski resorts. And do you know what I mean? And so if you misidentify someone as a potential threat because, well, they're going to have a beanie on their head, they're going to pull down into a mask, like, well, that really starts to break down really easily. So you look at all the variables and how likely it is for this to get it right every time. And then you ask the question of how often does an event like this happen across your hundreds of organizations? And it was, oh, the most we've ever had in a year is 5. And like some years we don't have any. And it's like, okay, there's that. Or let's track how many guests are coming into your organization and where they're going and how long they're spending in those areas. So you can staff accordingly. So you're not overstaffed. You are properly staffed and efficient, but you're also staffed in the right areas based upon data, not someone's assumption. Because a store manager or branch manager, they're not trained on forecasting, right? Like I would be terrible at forecasting, but that's something that AI is like purposely built to do.
Mm-hmm.
Analyze data, look at trends, and forecast likely outcomes.
Oh yeah, for sure, man.
Anyways, like you just start to look at the impact of things, and I think you nailed it on the head. That it's what are those repeatable things that have really high impact to an organization versus some really complex problem that's near impossible to solve and get right.
Let's talk about in the realm of future proofing. A future-proof strategy. So with AI advancing rapidly, how can retailers and restaurants invest in technologies today that won't become obsolete tomorrow? So I look at that as how do we avoid the FOMO, the infamous FOMO? Like I'm going to buy something that scales with me, that grows with me. How do these restaurant retailers invest into something that they can bet on for tomorrow?
Yeah. Right. Once AI, as we're seeing now, has become extremely powerful but commoditized, meaning it's readily available from multiple vendors, multiple models, multiple sources, the size of the data set and the volume of that data and the ability for that data to be manipulated and enhanced, if you will, becomes really, really important. So with that understanding of data, if you're looking at future proofing your sites where that data is collected, if you focus on solutions that are decoupled from point solutions and hardware solutions. And what I mean by that is you need really good, reliable hardware, but does all of the analysis happen at the hardware level, or does it just happen above that in the cloud where all of the data can be aggregated? Because if the magic, if you will, happens at the point that the data is collected, it becomes very rigid and difficult to change and update and manipulate and integrate to other systems. But if you decouple the analysis from the hardware and allow the hardware to do what it does very well, whether that's a camera that needs great light management, great lenses, great resolution, processing times, reliability, all of that, and a temperature sensor is reliable at doing temperature sensor and an access control, let them do their specific things, but don't tie the AI analysis at that point because it becomes siloed and you get only a piece of the story. AI is powerful the more complete picture it has to analyze. So I would decouple the solution from the data aggregation point, which the data aggregation point is all of these disparate hardware. And quite frankly, you just want it to be reliable and really good at what it does. And there are a lot of really quality vendors out there that do that. And oftentimes that's a different skill set than a software company, right? So I would decouple the two. And lastly, I would look at systems that are open and play very nicely with others. If you're buying a single point solution, once again, that does one thing, you're siloing that data and it's going to be really expensive to buy all of these different point solutions.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, we had in season 1, we talked about pros and cons of AI on the edge. And which is an interesting topic because there's one aspect where, like you're saying, you don't want to, there's only so much you could put on the edge. And what is it processing? And is it meaningful for the outcome we're trying to get to? Like, I get it if it needs to take people in cars. The inference speed is much faster if it's on the edge rather than trying to aggregate itself to the cloud, especially if you're like at a college campus and you need like more real-time reaction. But at the same time, so yeah, I guess I already answered both, right? So there's the positive is you get a faster inference for maybe limited things, but then the side of, and that's where we got to in the conversation, that both are needed, depending on what you need to do. Like, let's say that you had, the software manufacturer's job was to analyze the number of cars that would go through a scene or something. Well, on the edge, it's good to detect the cars, and that the camera can handle that type of workload. But then it doesn't expect that it's going to decide how many cars have gone through that image just from the camera, just from the edge side. And then that happens in the cloud or maybe on-prem. And that's not an exact use case. I'm just trying to make a simple example. You know what I mean?
No, you absolutely need both to do what
Mhm.
they do really well. I
Exactly.
think what we see that gets really expensive for folks
Mhm.
is when it's the bulk of what it's doing is on the edge
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's siloed and only, I mean, uses it a point solution. Like I mentioned drive through earlier, so I'll use that example. We'll go into these sites that have a camera system with a big server in the back that they spent, between 3 to 10 grand on at a typical restaurant or a C-store, especially retailer. They'll have another identical server right next to it. And if you go out to the exterior, they'll have separate cameras right next to the security cameras being used to track speed of service. And you're going, those are two systems you have to pay to install, purchase, maintain, replace, and they don't talk to each other. So they lack context of the greater picture.
Mm.
And so, right, like, okay, just step back and say, what do I actually need these things to do? Gather certain inference speed on the edge, absolutely. But does that talk nicely to the greater ecosystem? And if it doesn't, it's going to cause a lot of issues down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's go. You mentioned point systems a few times, so I want to come back to that. So let's talk AI platforms versus point systems, or go into point systems a little bit more detail. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of adopting integrated AI platforms compared to ones that are more specialized, single purpose point solutions for security and operational efficiency?
Yeah, that's a loaded question on that one. Obviously, based upon what we're building, I'm biased to the platform. But
Sure.
you
Yeah.
have to recognize that there are limitations and what are you looking to accomplish with the tool. And because we're specifically talking about AI today and why we chose the platform approach is that as AI becomes commoditized, integrative platforms win out long term because they're able to leverage bigger interconnected data sets that provide insights. Because we're talking restaurants, if I'm just tracking speed of service in the drive-through, well, what's happening in the lobby? And what is my labor as a percentage of sales? And what's happening when certain shift leads are working versus that speed, right? You want an interconnected system that can pull all of that information together so AI can analyze that and leverage and surface insights for you. So with platforms, specifically speaking AI, just you get more interconnected, larger data sets to analyze. On the reverse side of the with platforms, you don't get the depth of a certain part of a platform and a point solution. I'll use an example of loss prevention. We have a lot of great loss prevention tools in our platform at Savvy, and there's other platform companies that we've tried to model after that have great solutions that feed a number. But they typically only unlock about 75 to 90% of the value in a certain point vertical. There is that remaining 10 to 25% that they typically don't go extremely deep on. Like from our perspective, we have some point of sale integration and video search and analysis and trends and servicing things, but we haven't built a case management system and some of these other like long tail things that someone would want if they were just using this and doing one task all day, every day. The reason we went that way, right? So there's a con
Mm-hmm.
currently. Long term, we believe that AI agents are going to allow you to go deeper into specified point solutions if you have all of the data in one spot. You'll essentially have multiple AI agents doing different tasks and performing different, very specialized training
Mm-hmm.
to accomplish tasks using the same data set. One's going to be looking at loss prevention, one may be looking at operational efficiency, one may be looking at, the number of different use cases.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that you went to agents, because it's something I'm definitely hyped on for obvious reasons with my business. I wouldn't say hyped. I'm just excited about it. Hype's a different situation. as if it was like fake news and not ready yet. But
Yeah, you've started to see the power of it and you go, holy cow,
yeah,
this
man.
literally has the ability to transform how someone does their job.
Yeah, I mean, the attribute of actions is like the big ticket item, right? It's like the thing that just goes and do these things for you on your behalf. And in some cases, if it's a big decision, you'll remain human in the loop so that people are still involved in that decision-making process. And obviously even from a safety and security standpoint, which is not necessarily on the operational efficiency side, that's also really helpful. Like these things can comb through, if you've got a national retailer or a restaurant provider, comb through all these things, pick up on anomalous behavior or whatever, and then be able to trigger the next action to allow for more attention faster of the person is incredible. So let's talk a little bit about ensuring return on investment, right? We all like that term. And in business and as salespeople, we're kind of, that's something we have to convince people of, or the customers convince themselves of, obviously, at some stage in the buying process to make sure it's a good decision for them. So what metrics should businesses and retail and restaurants use to accurately evaluate this return on investment of AI-based security systems?
Yeah. I'll put these into the measurable categories, right? And then the like less tangible, but our personal belief almost equally as impactful, and kind of talk about that. So the measurable ones, right? Look at the things that have back to that impact to the organization and the magnitude. Simple throughput improvement, right? If an organization is able to increase their
Mm-hmm.
throughput while also simultaneously keeping a consistent customer experience, right? And having that insight to both, really measurable. You can take your average ticket value, look down to the throughput you're able to get at your peak times. And if you can get 10 more guests through at an average ticket value of $20, you do $200 a day, right? Really, really easily measurable, tangible thing that AI has the ability to impact today.
And throughput is a hot commodity within these businesses because it was shocking. I thought it was bad that commercial properties would have low throughput, but then you go to a restaurant retail and they're rolling up on a few meg or something. I'm just exaggerating, but
Yeah.
it's like, oh, and we want cloud cameras. I'm like, I don't know, like this isn't gonna work. Your access control system needs to go on a cell device. Like this is impossible. And by the way, we got to keep our POS system up and running at the same time on like 0.0.
Yeah, no, those upload speeds definitely used to
Yeah,
be a huge problem.
impossible.
Uh, but right, and if you look at the other side of it, like the customer throughput of how many cars you're getting through and what are the actual bottlenecks, so you're able to put that towards things that are really measurable. Throughput, customer satisfaction scores. Over 2/3 of all negative reviews don't actually mention the product. They mention the experience. And it's typically tied to either cleanliness, staff friendliness, and the biggest offender is wait times, right? There are certain establishments you're completely fine jumping in a long line and waiting for because you know how consistent they're going to get you through there. The quality of the product is good and the staff is friendly. So taking that whole picture into account, you can really start to measure the impact to your organization. Those things are measurable. Loss prevention, right? It's 4% of sales, gross sales, according to the National Restaurant Association, and the NRF for retail says around 2%. Right? This is a multi-billion-dollar massive problem that's happening every year. So if you can cut into that, even 10, 20, 30%, you're adding significantly to your bottom line, right? So make database decisions, measure what you're looking to improve on, and see if it does it. The intangible side of it that's a little bit harder to measure, and that's quality of life for our teams, right? I'm fortunate to run a great company and work with great people. They are the most valuable asset that Savvy has. And if I can improve the way that they do their work, the efficiency they do it, and their experience doing it, so they have a better quality of life, like we'll win in the long run. And organizations
Mm-hmm.
will look at that. But how do I measure that? Right? How do I measure that impact other than in surveys with the staff and recognizing and seeing, oh yeah, they don't have to spend all of this time doing mundane tasks that actually kill morale and all of those types of things. where no, I want you to unlock your brain power for solving new problems and making processes better and improving how we do things, because that's exciting and you feel accomplished and you have the opportunity to really thoroughly enjoy what you do and you go home happier, which impacts your families and all of that. So like the number one problem that retailers and restaurants talk about right now is retaining staff and talent. And I think AI has the opportunity to really be able to highlight those top performers, reduce the mundane tasks that they're doing so you can actually put them and their brain power to use on higher impact things.
It's so funny when you said that. I was like, did we just become best friends? Because I had a video when I released Highland Tech, my AI automation company, and I said that very, very similar thing where, people embracing AI as a force for removing the things that don't make us people. Like I always use this analogy, like these, or I have been in the last couple of weeks, is like keyboards. Like these things, like a typewriter, they weren't around for, maybe like a couple hundred years, right? So me as a millennials, many millennials, we've probably been around for millions of years, right? Depending on who you ask.
Yeah.
That we didn't communicate like that. We communicated verbally, maybe non-verbally, right? But something happened where somehow me inputting my finger energy into this became like many jobs for a lot of people, right? And so, but what did we do before as people? We didn't have that. So even if you look at like Native Americans in North America, let's say, maybe they were much more spiritual people. Maybe we were more emotionally connected. We were connected more to the earth, to nature. There's a whole, I could just go down a rabbit hole right now, but to be cognizant of the conversation, I won't. But what I would say to that end is that I 100% agree with you, because to me, the promise of AI is not only an abundance of AI that will be too cheap to meter, and like you said, it's going to be commoditized, but it'll be more of like the transformation of people that will do the things that are really ingrained in our DNA, and not like what we have been doing, probably more so for the last 100 years, or much less in the technology. Great example. And earlier podcast, I mentioned this, and the guest was like definitely all about this. And I'm thinking like, let's go back to the topic, but it's a good example is like social media, right? So social media was meant to connect people. I think if you ask most people, they would probably say it's disconnected us more. And so what happens is that fostering connection is much easier when I'm with people, I'm in person with people, or I'm having conversations like this where, we are talking for an hour and I'm learning a lot about you and your perception and your belief system. And that is a human engagement that's worth something, rather than like, oh, I liked your post on LinkedIn and that's how I'm staying connected to you. I'm like, no, you're just in my network. I don't even know who's connected in my network. I could probably only list so many names off the top of my head that's in my network on LinkedIn, right? Versus the rest. And that doesn't say I don't know these people. I know a lot of people. It's just saying that meaningfulness is built elsewhere, and probably in the place that we as humans are most familiar with, which is some of the things I mentioned before. So I'm really excited about AI, to the point you made, other than, growing a business and making money and, just transforming, these repetitive tasks, but to elevate people to rise to the occasion and to live to their potential. And it's hard to do that when you're stuck in keyboards and you're stuck in spreadsheets. That sucks, man. I don't know many people that, it's funny, I had a professor in college, he said to me once, maybe that's why I did it. He said, and I don't know how relevant that is, but I just think it's a funny story. He said, Don, the two jobs that will always be around is sales and marketing, because no one wants to do them. And I was like, okay, sorry, sales and accounting, because no one wants to do them. And I was like, well, I've been a salesperson and I like doing it, but I can understand the ups and flows and it can get emotionally draining. I understand that. And then accounting, because like, who wants to do debits and credits all day? Like, I mean, my dad did accounting, but God bless him, because that's a tough job. It's not something I'm like, I am pumped to talk about, like, debits and credits and like the spreadsheets and the balance sheets and income statements. Like, I'm just riled up about that. So anyways, I'm getting way off topic.
Similar background there. Looked at accounting. My father had done some accounting. He became an entrepreneur, and I looked at it and did one class, and that was enough for me. Necessary, but not pumped on it.
Exactly, man. So let's talk about ethics. So ethics in retail with AI. So, what are some ethical dilemmas unique to retail and restaurant environments when deploying AI for security, loss prevention, or even customer analytics?
Yeah, I think you start to look at it comes back to the golden rule for me, like treat others the way you would want to be treated, right? Do I have a problem when I call into my cell phone provider and they tell me that this call is going to be recorded for quality and assurance purposes? I don't, right, Greg? I personally am like, I can see how this is going to improve their experience. And then, like, one time I needed it when I called in and asked for something on a plan. And if a country I was visiting was included, they told me it was. Then I went there and I ended up with this massive charge. And I was really glad they recorded that call because I was like, hey, you got the call recorded, pull it up. And sure enough, yeah, you're right. We stated that. We need to credit your account.
I love this example, by the way. I know I just had to say it because I haven't heard it this way, but I like it. Go ahead.
Yeah,
This is great.
you're like, yeah, I genuinely see how this is going to improve their business, improve my experience, and honestly help me and eliminate he said, she said. Like, totally get it. I'm fine with that. Now, where people start to get uncomfortable is like when me and my wife were having a conversation at home about something, and then next thing we know, the ad pops up the next time we grab our phones and look at the TV, right? All of a sudden you start to go, okay, what in the world's going on here? Unplug all the Alexas, right? Unplug everything.
The Cookie Monster.
Yeah, exactly. And like, if I step back, like it's actually making my life a little bit easier. Like we're talking about going on a trip somewhere and then it shows us all the places there to go on a trip. Like actually, like that's not a terrible thing, but they weren't transparent about it. And so I don't understand why they're doing it and what they're doing it. And we don't like the unknown. So back to ethics, right? Think of it. If I was a customer of your brand, I want to have a great experience when I come there. I want your employees to be well trained and happy. Right? I want those things. So I'm fine with those things being tracked. I'm fine with going in and having security cameras in public places track me and my family. Like I have zero issue with that. And most people, if you just interviewed them, they'd be like, no, I don't, right? I don't have an issue with that because it's transparent and you see the benefits of it. So my long rant, I think you have to be really, really transparent about what you're doing and why you're doing it. I don't think you have to get into the mechanics of how you're doing it. I don't care how they're technically recording my call and where they're storing it and how, like, that type of stuff, as long as I know that they're protecting it, right, and taking my privacy, I'm fine with it. The second part of it is I do think you have to look at, well, if this went wrong, what's the implications to it? Which is why it's savvy. We won't do any identifiable data. Does AI and technology exist that we can analyze you and tell you your dawn and everything about you? Yes. If that was used in the wrong way, what's the implications of that? And if they profiled you wrong, whether like we get asked all the time about facial recognition for employee compensation, right? Because time theft it's a very real problem. If that goes wrong though, and an employee misses out on a paycheck because the system did it wrong, it like that's not a good thing to be doing. And on the customer side of things, tracking you and where you're going, like I start to go, I don't know how I feel about that. So be transparent about what you're doing. And if it could go wrong, where's it going to go? And I believe you should allow AI to analyze trends and systematic patterns, not specifics. So you can solve that employee theft problem by just using AI to count how many labor hours are on premise against what's registered in the system, get 95% of the value out of it without the risk of it going back.
That was great. Yeah, it's what I one of the I was thinking of like punchlines in my head, and I went from, hey, instead of the PII, we're going to do the BII. So instead of personal identifiable information, we're going to give you the business identifiable information, and we're going to be able to get you a ton of value without the security. So, or without the risk vulnerability or whatever, or the liability. So if you take it and you put it as a bumper sticker for
That's what I was
Savvy,
going to say. If you see this out there, it's attributed back to Don. You heard it first from him.
hey man, as a new entrepreneur, I will accept royalties. So let's go into the human element, right? I want to talk a little bit more of this. I always include people. I'm a huge advocate of people. Yeah, I'm an AI company, but I think the way Brock had described it earlier is exactly my perception of this, that I want people to win, but I want them to win in a way that makes them better, right? And I think, not that this is the question, I'm just trying to make the transition right now into this next question, but I just want to let the audience know that if you don't know me by now, I'm a huge fan of people, but I also I run an AI agency, and so our job is to remove the things that you suck, and so not the things that you want to do. And so in any case, going back to the human impact, or the human element, what increased AI usage in the restaurant retail space has diminished or enhanced the role of the security personnel and the frontline employees?
Yeah. I mean, for sake of time, to not go into a long monologue here, I just come back to the simple, mundane tasks, right? We started Savvy because when we were interviewing operators, they said, hey, it is really, really difficult for us to just understand what behaviors on site are driving our profitability and what are causing loss. Like, we generally know how people are doing things, but it's really hard to know when, and all these disconnected systems. So you hear that from above store executive teams, but then you go meet with the folks in the store and you start talking to them, and they're spread extremely thin. They're trying to do more with less, right? Because profits are being squeezed, but they also, with increased tracking and scrutiny and all of these things, they're having to measure more, and there's more processes they're having to implement and track if someone is doing it, from temperature reading, store cleanliness, just all of these different things that are like tasks that someone's walking around with an iPad taking a picture or writing something down. So because you started to track it, because it's important, now someone has to do that part of the work, which is mundane, right? And not high impactful, but they're spending a significant amount of time doing that. And then when it comes time for them, they're being asked, in my opinion, to do things that they're not trained for, nor falls in their wheelhouse, like labor forecasting. Like, it's really hard to forecast labor and inventory, but you have a store manager with not a significant amount of training and forecasting and data analysis doing that. And they do an incredible job at it.
A lot of it's probably the gut strength that they built up over time.
Yeah, it is. And a lot of it is, making decisions that way. And so if I step back now after interviewing and looking at the challenges that both of those are trying to accomplish, and above store wants to understand more of what's going on, so they're maybe putting in processes and checks. Simple one would be loss prevention. Because of sales, like, only certain people can issue refunds, and you have to get approval to do things and to get cash out of the register, right? Like, I see why from the above store, but then for an employee who's actually trying to do their job and it's busy, and and a guest is trying to get a refund, and the employee's like, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And they have an upset, irate customer. Like, what do you mean? I've got to wait for my manager, and they're busy in the back doing something, right? Like, starts to create this bottleneck. So you have this dichotomy. AI actually solves that because it allows you to be able to have someone working without vacations, without breaks, without any of this, actually watching this and letting you know anytime anything happens that does not meet your standards, it's going to surface it for you so you can instantly take action. So it allows you to actually put more autonomy back on your teams, but you have the quality assurance oversight of, if it does go wrong, I know about it and I can take action quickly. It's not going to go wrong for months and months and months and months and cost me significantly. So now you're empowering your team, which, when you empower people and give them autonomy and free up their brain power to engage with staff rather than mundane tasks, all of a sudden you have a far better experience going on for everyone around, because employees now can have control over improving customer satisfaction scores and service times, because you're actually tracking things at a systemic level and a system-wide level and looking for scalable processes, versus always just trying to crisis manage by, there's a fire, point the hose. I'm going to give you a hose. Your job's to point the hose at the fire. And they feel like, well, why am I having to hold it? Can I just stop the person who's walking around lighting fires? But without that type of oversight and data, nearly impossible to get that insight. And AI is unlocking and will continue to unlock that insight So people are doing what they do really, really well, which is have the impact, take insights, take advice, and go in and implement it. AI is not going to be able to do that. I'll use an analogy of Moneyball, right? Like the data analyst, I love sports, not a huge baseball guy, but love sports. And you see it rippling across, but they just looked at it and said, okay, what can data do, which is predict and analyze data and predict better outcomes based upon that data so you can start running tests. They couldn't make the players swing the bat, though. They just put the right players in the right place so that, in Jim Collins' sense, the right people are in the right seats on the bus. AI is going to empower people to do that, but it's the people that are going to impact the change once the data is served up to them.
Wow. Yep. It's almost like AI is a precursor to future performance. I love the way that that was described. So one of the things that I think is cool, sometimes it comes up in the podcast where we demystify things that we hear about in the industry. And I think one of those I'd love to get to is around analytics or AI analytics versus traditional ones. So the question is like, what are the most compelling examples where AI-driven analytics have significantly outperformed traditional ones in retail and the restaurant setting?
Yeah, I'll use one. I mean, I'm just going to come back to the drive-through, right? Or actually, I'm going to flip it. Let's go in store.
Let's go in store. Wait, which kind of? What, is this like? Are we in a
Yeah,
Jimmy John's or where are we at? I
let's
need a
say
visualize.
we're in a fast casual pizza chain. I try not
Perfect.
to ever put out, but this is like a really real, a real story because it happened to me. I have 3 young kids. Like my family's everything to me. Spend a lot of time with them, right? Kind of trying to balance family and a busy work life. So, I remember one night coming home, my wife, we had 3 kids under the age of 5, right, at the time. So just pure chaos at the Weeks house. And I was starting a software startup, right? Like just you can imagine the what's going on in the home. So I get home on a Friday night and it's like, hey, can you just take the kids? I just want to go for a walk, get a breather. And I'm like, yeah, we'll run and go get some pizza. We walk in, there's 4 people in line, right? With 3 kids under the age of 5. I'm not going to get in a long line. But I got in a line with 4 or 5 people, figured this is going to take me 5 minutes, maybe 8 minutes to get through. 20 minutes later, my kids are crying and screaming. The people in front of me are like, what is going on? As we've only moved like 3 spots. But then you're like, I'm committed. Do I stay here?
Like when you're in so deep, you just got to keep
Yeah,
going.
you're literally
Don't
looking
give
at,
up.
and anyone who's putting
So you
kids in
had this
the car
startup
seat,
mentality with you already in the line. You're like, I'm in too deep. I got to
yeah,
keep going.
I'm here. We're going to power through. But like, do I want to put a kid back in a car seat and deal with it and go somewhere else? No. But the point where I'm trying to like give you my experience of that is there was one employee behind that counter busting their butt trying to get people through, but he was prepping the dough and then putting the toppings on, putting it in the oven, and then let me check you out. And so 2 employees were standing in the back having a conversation, and one was actually out front cleaning the windows. Above store is never going to know about that experience. And their traditional analytics were we're going to track speed of service by when someone hits a button on a key somewhere that an employee has to track, which when we have human input, it's always prone to error. So they may have tracked when I actually got up to the counter and the guy finally got my pizza and hit the button and said start and then checked me out. And it's going to show 2-3 minutes when we were actually standing in line forever. And right, most people aren't going to say anything. They might have gotten frustrated enough and thought, I'm going to get a coupon out of this. I'm going to leave a negative review. And they just say the service time was terrible, took forever. Well, was that a staff problem? Was that a training problem? Was it a process problem? Were they just overloaded on guests? Like, it's nearly impossible to figure that out. And analytics just look at one specific thing. They maybe would have just done guest count. AI is taking into context everything of what was our labor hour on site? How long did it take the people to actually walk through the entire experience? And what was this element here, right? It can analyze and aggregate all of that data together so you can surface and say, our optimal staff to service time ratio is this, and our goal is this. So we were way over goal, but our labor hours, we had enough people on site. So I just eliminated all of this guesswork. And now I know like it's a process or task problem. I don't have to do all this guessing. AI is like purpose built to do that. Now, it's not going to go train the people, but it's purpose built to say, district manager, this store here having this problem, and it actually repeats when these people work together, right? Like all of that can be surfaced in mere seconds to minutes, where before, I mean, good luck trying to take the time to go aggregate all of that data.
I love it. I got to tell you, you're crushing these answers, man. Like it's awesome. I think that was such a good such a good example because it brought me into it to feel the story, not only from your perspective as a customer waiting in line and your observation of the other customers around you, but also the perspective of the guy that was basically left to do everything on his own, where everybody was two people were chit chatting in the back, the other guy was washing windows, which definitely didn't sound as important as serving our customers. And like you said, like there's these points that exist in that interaction that helps tell the story. Just focus on the BII, not the PII.
Yeah.
And I think that is such well said. So let's talk about some scalability concerns with these things. So, and I think that's certainly a topic. I mean, when I serve some restaurant retail customers, scalability is always an issue because why? Because they have a bunch of locations all over the place. You're usually, for the most part, I imagine your business wasn't built on boutique restaurants that have one location. It was probably on national chains or bigger footprint companies. So there is scalability that is a concern with them. So we'll talk about that now. So how can businesses efficiently scale AI implementation across multiple retail locations or restaurant chains without sacrificing consistency or effectiveness?
Yeah. We were actually just having this conversation this morning with a brand, and it really comes back to some of the first part of your questions around like, how am I measuring the effectiveness of this? What's the end goal I'm looking for? And I need to be really transparent with my team around why we're doing this. Because this Brock Weeks belief here, at our core, all of us want to do good. We want to perform well. We want to show up well. We want to do a good job. And most of us, right, won't blatantly go out of our way to harm someone else, meaning harm their business by taking, like, it's just most people are good. But what happens is when you don't have understanding, and I think you see this in our world today, with lack of understanding and not taking the time to try to see others' point of view, the divides just grow, right? Because I'm just going to talk at people and not talk with each other. So I think scalability needs to be looked at from a tech stack perspective, but also from a workflow and a personnel perspective. So with that, now like the practical application of it, AI becomes powerful when it can, when the data set increases in context and volume, right? Every good data set from CRMs to payment systems to the bad part of big data, it becomes powerful when it's aggregated. If you look at a point solution of, I just need to run credit cards, right? Well, yeah, then you just find a system that's really quick at processing credit card and payment information, and that's the only thing it needs to do. But the byproduct of everything that's happening there, what was bought, right? Well, and the quantity of it and what time, that's going to help you for inventory. That's going to help you for prep and planning in the future. If you had that data that historically 20 years ago was being lost at the point of sale, right? It was kind of this byproduct of a point solution. AI is going to allow us to make all of that byproduct useful. So it has to be interconnected. And in our opinion, that's why you've seen every data set move to the cloud. We felt video needed to be moved to the cloud, 100% of it. Because if you have snippets, you lose context. But if you have the full context and experience, AI becomes really, really powerful. So open systems that talk to each other, data sets that's easy to update and change and integrate, right? The best technology companies in the world, like Apple, I'm on a Mac doing this call today, they do one major software update a year. Doing firmware updates is really, really hard. And then after doing that firmware update, there's 2 to 4 subsequent updates that are all just bug fixes over, a 6 to 8 month period of time. So if the core of the processing is siloed, and it's hard to update because it requires all of that firmware, and it's difficult to integrate to other systems, and it's hard to retain and correlate the amount of data, you're going to run into scalability issues. But if it's easy to aggregate all of that information together so that you can start to actually, now the flip side of it to the people, they're being measured on the same thing, right? No one likes to be a part of a game where they're playing by two different rules. So you think about, okay, I want to improve these things and measure it. How do I standardize this across the board so that it allows a level playing field for everyone to compete? And if you're transparent about what you're looking to accomplish, how you're going to do it, why you're going to do it, people then rise and like to compete and play in those games.
Yeah. Well, I hope me and you are playing the same game. I'm sure we are.
Yes.
No, I think we
I
are.
feel like now after this conversation, man, we got a lot in common here. We need to go grab lunch and chat more.
That's it. That's it. We might have covered this a little bit before, and if so, you could touch on it quickly and can move on to the next one. But I think what we talked about was more like data analysis, AI data analysis almost, right? So let's think in terms of like predictive efforts. The thing to tell me before it happens, if you will. So around predictive security and operations. So how realistic is the concept of predictive security or anticipating preventing incidents before they happen in today's retail and restaurant environments?
Depending on, right, you start to get really specific on what you're trying to predict.
Right.
So as you tell, we've leaned heavily to the operations and how this stuff can be leveraged
Right.
in the operations world. But back to my analogy of how, if you're tracking speed of service on the exterior through a pickup window or a drive-through, but you're also tracking speed of service on the interior, and you're correlating that with the amount of transactions that are happening and the amount of staff you have on site, when you're aggregating all of that data together and then tracking it every day for a few years, AI is going to be really, really good at going back and saying, it's Tuesday at this time, you're trending this way. This is how many labor hours you need at this time. This is how many you need at 11. This is how many at noon, right? Like, it's going to be able to predict and forecast that out quite accurate, right? It can't predict the school bus is going to stop and dump off a bunch of players, right, late at night. But if it has 4 February's worth of Thursday nights of that actually happening across the, like, AI is really good to not miss that. Where a human's just like, it's a Thursday night in February, it's cold, people aren't out, but they're not taking into account maybe that your location is is pretty close on the main thoroughfare to a stadium where a bunch of high school teams are having tournaments. AI is going to be able to predict that very well. I think the other thing it can predict is maybe not the real-time threat of something happening, at least in our business. I think in other very specific businesses, it's going to be able to, like gun detection, and that's getting really, really accurate. The way people are moving and where they're going and tracking. I think it's going to be able to do things to protect campuses and things like that, general public. But stopping loss and stopping theft, you'd be shocked at how many times we'll go into a brand where they've found out that an employee's been abusing their employee discount policy and redemptive rewards policy for user loyalty to the tune of like $5,000 to $1,000 or $10,000 over a period of time, because it was just gradual and it was happening. The employee, if you talk to them, they honestly are like, did not realize they were stealing. They're like, well, they gave me free food and I watched Dawn do it and Brockward was doing it. So I'm just going to go ahead and I can give free, right?
Why not?
And they're like, oh, well, it's our employee discount. It's one of the perks we get for working here. Like, they're not adding up that all that food. And then they're like, well, the employee's not putting their phone and scanning it. So I'm just going to scan my own. And then I'll redeem it for t-shirts and tumblers and take it home to my friends and family, right? Like, the company's already baked that in, and it's like, no, that's not what it's there for. AI is going to catch that the first time. So you can have that conversation with that individual and let them know, hey, this is theft. This is what you did. You can't do this again. And it ends up being like a slap on the wrist, $4. Company's protected and saves those thousands and thousands of dollars. But that employee now doesn't have a record. Nothing worse than a 19, 20-year-old who ends up with a misdemeanor because they were stealing from someone. And it was like, well, yeah, you stole 10 grand from me. I have to press charge it. Like, right? There's just so much good that can happen with catching it as early as possible in the process. And AI is getting really predictive at moving those timelines up. Now, stopping in real time, that's a whole different discussion that I think is still a little bit away unless you have the amount of money to just invest for the what if, and there does not need to be an ROI and a business case for it.
Right. Yeah. I love that you're also able to reach into the future without feeling like it's disrupting your agenda too much, right? Because everybody has something, right? And I don't mean agenda it's a negative way. Like everybody has something. You have a company, has a product, and I love that you can reach into that because some people they have a hard time reaching to the future when it does not serve the current state at all. And I think that the AI space, as you're well aware, is changing every week, and maybe even sooner than that. And it's one of those things where we're keeping our eyes on it because it's going to affect all of us. And it's saying we're reaching, but we're reaching for the things that, of course, are going to impact ourselves and our businesses. And so I can appreciate that. So, and on that topic of the future, and this is the last question, right? We're going to end up with. We're going to talk about the next 5 years from your perspective, right? So, what transformative developments in AI should retail and restaurant businesses prepare for within the next 5 years?
Great question to end on. I do want to just comment because it segues into the answer to this question on your technology and looking into the future. It's really, really interesting to me that we typically make purchasing decisions around technology on past performance. Right? Like what's the known? What's the known I know this system can do? What's the known of the use cases I know? So I'm going to make all of my judgments based upon that and purchase things backwards rather than looking forward. So I bring that up because we look at the next 5 years, honestly, the last 90 days, our perspective on how things are going to evolve has changed quite drastically as technology's changed. We've touched on agents a few more times than anyone, right? Me and Don have never met before until this call, but like talking before he was talking about agents, like huge plug, anyone who's trying to like understand AI, go understand agents. Go find someone like Don who can explain that to you. Because when you start to understand that power, you realize like this is going to change the way that we use things. We're no longer going to interact with systems and things the way that we used to. It's going to remove multiple steps and honestly change products. And I'll use searching the web. I used to go ask Google a question, and then I would go and figure out which website that it surfaced for me, right? It's scoured the web. I would pick which one I wanted to go to. And then I would read through and try to skim for the information that seemed relevant to me. And then I would summarize it in my head. And if I was doing research or doing a report, I would then put that in some centralized place. Well, now, the chat GTP that everyone's used to, I don't do that anymore. I just use Grok and that's the one I like, right? And I just give it a really well worded prompt of like, I want this information, but this is how I traditionally would have looked at it. Go find it all for me. And it summarizes it, puts it in a nice like sheet for me, and significantly saves me time. So with that premise, looking into the future 5 years, I think AI is going to remove mundane tasks and essentially eliminate those so that we can actually deepen human connection. And what I mean by that is that in our world, a district manager is no longer going to have to show up at a location and spend half or more of their time looking at things to do research to understand how well it's operating, or looking at reports and walking around to see how clean it is and whatnot. They're going to walk in armed with all of that information and insight, ready to take action. So they spend that time doing what a great manager should do, which is coaching people. Right? They're going to be able to take information at their fingertips that has the entire context of what would have typically taken a team of analysts to put together, and it's delivered at the palm of their hand, right? Like you're looking, in my opinion, at that same evolution that happened when we had smartphones and all of a sudden the internet became available anywhere. Like It changes how I vacation now. It changes the restaurants I eat at because I'm able to correlate. And instead of thinking, oh, let's drive around and look for an Italian restaurant, best Italian with the best cannolis for dessert, right? Like I can do
That's
that.
awesome.
It's changed how we do things.
Hmm.
I think it's going to have that impact. Now, exactly how and what models into that advance, anyone's guess. So data sets, though, the larger the data set, the more powerful the AI can be. So if I'm a business owner and I'm doing this at Savvy, I'm looking at where do we have disparate systems, siloed information, or information that would actually be really valuable, but that's lost, right? Like I have calls every day, our sales team's talking to customers, our customer success team, our support team. I can aggregate all of that together and AI can now start to take that audio, convert it to text, to analyze it. Like it's changed the way we do our product roadmap. It's changed the way we do feature improvements and enhancements. Like I don't know what it's going to do, but if you can aggregate that data together and figure out the most affordable way to do that and find platform companies that can put that together, the AI agents will bring the specialty in the future. And I think it's going to happen quicker than we all anticipate.
I love it. Brock, this has been awesome to have you. Really appreciate the insights. I think I found a friend also. And so I'm super excited for the conversation, man. Your wealth of knowledge, your expertise in the retail restaurant space is second to none. I feel like I can say that genuinely because I worked and sold in that industry for quite some time. And I think a lot of things you said were great in balance of both current state, future state, human impact. So just want to say thanks and appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Genuinely, thanks for having me. I feel like I've got a new friend, as you said, chatting about this and love your insights of how you guys are looking at things. It's so interesting to see how all of this is coming together in everyone's different specific domains. So love it.